Hey guys, welcome into the show. Here we are, week 7, another week. We are past the halfway point, and a lot of concern, desperation on the faces of some of you guys in the emails that are coming in, and a lot of you guys on cruise control now as we head into the 7th fantasy football weekend of the 2017 season. And like we always do, we're going to go through the player rankings. We're going to go through some start bench. I'm going to address some start questions, some roster questions that you guys might have this week. And I'm definitely going to try to make up for my embarrassing Ronquavian Tarver start from last week. So I get a shot at redemption this week. I'll give myself a mulligan on that and try to make things up this week. So if you're just coming in, thanks for joining us. Joe DeSalvo here, the voice of the CFF site. We're heading into week 7. And, you know, there was something that came up on last week's show, and I want to address it because someone had a question. I lost my train of thought. And I remember it was in regards to Lamar Jackson. So I'll finish that thought from last week. And it fits into the theme of what I'm going to discuss this week. Because as I mentioned when I first came on live, that there were some, that I'm getting some emails, have gotten some emails where some of you are like, Joe, listen, I'm sitting there 6-0, I'm double headers. Some of you guys 12-0, 10-2. And then on the conversely, I'm also getting a bunch of emails where, Joe, I'm sitting at 500. Joe, I'm sub 500, and panic starting to set in a little bit. And here's my message to you. We're right past the halfway point in the regular season from a fantasy standpoint for some of you guys. And this fits in with the theme that I was addressing with Lamar Jackson last week when he wasn't having a good first half. College football is a game of two halves. It's not like NFL. If a guy goes dry in the first half, you could pretty much, the second half, you're not going to get much. You could shoot for an average performance at best. College fantasy football is not like that. It's a tale of two halves. It is not unlike any elite fantasy college football player to put up 20 to 30 points in the second half of a game alone. And that's what we saw last week with Lamar Jackson, where Louisville got beat, but he did pull out a pretty decent game for some of you guys. What we're not seeing is some of those 50-point games that Lamar Jackson put up last year, but we are seeing a lot of consistency. And as a matter of fact, oddly enough, even though he's not given some of those 50, 60-point games that he had last year, right now we currently have him as the #1 fantasy quarterback in college football. So I think that says a lot about the consistency of what Lamar Jackson has been able to give you fantasy owners, not only last year, but into 2017 as an encore performance. But getting back to the theme before we go ahead and get to the player rankings, about panic, about desperation coming in on some emails. You know, I'm going to kind of use this as an example, guys. I mentioned this last week. I set up 3 in-house leagues, CFF site in-house leagues, and we did a 5-week regular season. 8 teams were identified for a double elimination tournament. That double elimination tournament started last week. And what I'll tell you, and here's a couple of notes from those tournaments, that in 2 of the 3 tournaments, the number 2 and 3 seeds both lost their first game. And in another league, the top seeds, number 1 and 2, both lost their first game. So what I'm telling you guys is this. NFL fantasy, college fantasy, especially you guys that are new to college fantasy football, it's a completely different beast. You really just need to get to the playoffs in college fantasy football. Position yourself. It doesn't matter if you're the 8 seed. It doesn't matter if you're the 1 seed. When everybody gets in the playoffs, it starts from scratch, and it's all about matchups. So it's all about getting there. Scratch, claw, work the waiver wire, get yourself in the playoffs, and once when you earn one of those 8 spots, for some leagues it's 6, for some leagues it's just 4. You just have to get there. It all starts from scratch once when you get there. And so don't be discouraged if you're sitting 500 right now. A lot of season to go. You just have to get to the playoffs, and then it's a whole new ball game from right there. So that kind of takes care of the theme message for this week. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get into the player rankings just like I always do. We're going to go ahead and do the start bench, and then I'm going to take some of your questions that you guys have sent in here. If you don't mind, wait till the start bench piece to start sending that in. I'll go ahead and check Twitter as well if you want to send some of those in. But thank you guys for coming in, and thanks for joining. Here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to go right into Week 7 rankings. We're going to go with the quarterbacks. Last week, I kind of ran through 1 through 20 in each list. There's a few guys that I'm going back to highlights now. I'm going back to some guys that I really want to highlight. I don't want to spend too much time on some of the obvious players, but I do want to highlight some of the players that I think are worth noting this week. In particular, top 10 quarterbacks, a lot of emails coming in. Nick Fitzgerald, you've got him. You guys have him in the top 10 this week. You know, Nick Fitzgerald, quarterback, Mississippi State, coming off of a couple of tough matchups, guys. But you have to remember what we were talking about Fitzgerald in the beginning of the year. You can't let a couple of roadblocks along the way discourage you from playing Fitzgerald when the matchups are sweet on paper. And that's what you have this week with Fitzgerald hosting a BYU team that's certainly struggling right now. You've got to get Fitzgerald in your lineup. I think he's definitely a top 10, top 12 quarterback this week. Nick Fitzgerald is definitely a start and in the top 10. Kelly Bryant crept up the list as the week kept going along. We landed him, and he's landed at number 11 for us. And the reason why is we were waiting on news from his ankle. Clemson does have a bye week coming up, but we certainly anticipate Clemson needing Kelly Bryant this week. And against Syracuse on the road, I think they're going to need him often. I think they'll lean on him. He seems to be okay. Remember, if Bryant wasn't okay, guys, Clemson has enough talent in the backup positions. They wouldn't run him out there. I think you could feel confident with Kelly Bryant this week, Clemson, playing on the road at Syracuse, and that's why we have him ranked in the top 12. Khalil Tate, quarterback Arizona, and I know what you're saying, man. I wish we would have had this guy last week, and I'll tell you this right now. Just from experience in college fantasy football, don't expect another 1,000 yards rushing this week and 25 touchdowns from Khalil Tate. Very rarely does a guy, he will not back up that performance, right? He set a single game record for rushing yards from the quarterback position in the FBS. That's not going to happen again this week, but he should have a good game. If he had a little bit of a better track record, in other words, if we saw this consistency over time, Tate would probably be a top 5 quarterback this week because he's playing a UCLA defense that's one of the worst in the FBS against the run. But sometimes you have to be careful with the one-week wonders, right? And I'm going to address this theme coming up later on with a player in the start bench. But I think UCLA's defense is porous enough that I think you could feel comfortable that Tate's going to be a mainstay in this game, barring injury or some type of turnover problem. I think he's okay as a top 12, 15 quarterback this week. We've got Arian Worthman at 17. I think Arian Worthman could be a more valuable quarterback this week than a number 17 ranking, playing at home against UNLV this week. I think Arian Worthman could be in the Zach Abey conversation this week with that triple option offense and the points that they're going to score. And when you look at this list, right, Zach Abey, number 6, Worthman getting a lot of work at that quarterback spot for Air Force. Nick Shimonek, number 18. I think that's probably a little bit of a surprise for you, for some of you guys. It's a little bit of a surprise for me. But Texas Tech has all of a sudden turned this new leaf where they want to start using their running backs a little bit more. They realize they've got something going in the running game, and that has me a little concerned about Shimonek's fantasy prospects moving forward. I don't think it really affects Kiki QT, the wide receiver, but it certainly has affected other players such as Derek Willis and even the consistency of receivers like Dylan Cantrell. But I do think Shimonek is a top 20 quarterback. They will probably be falling behind against West Virginia on the road, so I think you're going to see Texas Tech air it out this week, and I think Shimonek's ceiling is higher than his 18 ranking. Tyler Rogers at 19. We landed at Rogers at 19. I think he could go higher, and here's why. There's a couple of factors that are playing with Rogers' fantasy value and fantasy stock this week. Larry Rose, the running back, is now questionable heading into the weekend, and now it seems like Jaleel Scott is probable headed into the weekend. If those two factors hold true, I really think you've got to feel really confident in Rogers as a top 20 quarterback playing at Georgia Southern this week. And if you play in a 2-quarterback full FBS league, he's a start. Number 24, Malik Rozier, quarterback, Miami, playing Georgia Tech. Now, I have to tell you, I think this is going to be a really difficult contest for Miami. I think it's going to be a real close and highly contested game. But I do like Malik Rozier from here on out. He's actually performed really well. Go back and check his numbers. You might be surprised. And now Mark Walton is gone for the year. They have Travis Homer at running back and some unproven depth behind him. Guess who's going to earn a few more carries? Guess who the Hurricanes are going to need to have some carries to move the ball in that offense? That's right, quarterback Malik Rozier. I do like him from here on out as a nice quarterback too, even in a full FBS. And I think in your Power 5 leagues, he's going to be a start for some of you guys that don't have one of those elite quarterbacks. Keep an eye on Malik Rozier moving forward. Number 32, we had asterisk by him for those of you that have the extended rankings. Tyler Huntley, quarterback, Utah. Updated news, I would scratch him. Listed as doubtful for this week at USC. Go ahead and take him off your list. Number 33, Manny Wilkins, quarterback, Arizona State. I warned you guys last week on this show about Manny Wilkins playing Stanford, and I don't think Manny Wilkins even gave you double digits from your quarterback spot if you had to play him. I think if you did, you were probably in a Power 5 league, and I think you have the same concern this week, even though they're at home. But Washington comes to town. And Washington right now, if I had to pick one side of the ball where they're just more efficient, it's on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Manny Wilkins, you have to be really careful with him this week. You have to play in a single quarterback deep Power 5 league for Manny Wilkins to be in your lineup this week. And then one more player to note before I move on to the running backs. I'm going to touch on quarterback Connecticut, Brian Sheriffs. Brian Sheriffs, I mentioned last week, was my pickup to team up with Lamar Jackson because I had a feeling Brandon Wimbush was not going to be playing when we did this show Thursday. And like I always say, guys, if we haven't gotten word, if you haven't gotten word right now on a player definitely being ready, then you have to be careful. I think you need to sit him because for as many Kiki QTs as there are, like last week, I think he caught 8 passes and a touchdown, and he was a game-time decision. There are just as many people that might have started Brandon Wimbush when we were warning you not to, but yet the news was coming out that he may be listed as probable. I always say you have to err on the side of caution. You have to look at a better option unless you are just completely, and your depth is completely depleted. But Brian Sheriffs drops to number 55. Even after a few solid outings, what he did last week against Memphis in the second half was he gave you nothing. And now the confidence level is a little shot from a consistency standpoint, and I did get an email on him this week, and that's why Sheriffs is ranked number 55. And I'm not saying he couldn't be a top 30, top 35 quarterback, but they're playing on the road. They're playing at Temple, whose defense isn't as good as it's supposed to be. But let's be honest, guys. Temple's defense is way better than Memphis's defense, and he couldn't do much against Memphis last week. So I just wanted to touch on Brian Sheriffs, the quarterback of Connecticut, before we moved on to the running backs. So that's what we'll do. We'll get into Week 7 rankings. If you're just coming in, thank you guys for joining in live. I'm going to get to some of your questions before we get off the air here. We're going to get into Week 7 rankings at the running back spot. And if you're just joining us, I said I'm just going to highlight some guys this week. Last week we ran through the top 20. This week we're going to highlight a few guys. And there's a bunch of running backs that I'm going to highlight and a bunch of guys that I want to touch on that are on our injury report as well. Because here's the thing. When it comes to running backs and ranking the running backs, really when it comes to ranking any position, guys, if there's a ton of injuries, to me, it doesn't make the rankings harder. It doesn't make the rankings harder to project. In my opinion, it makes the rankings easier to project. Because if you've got a guy that's questionable on a Thursday evening, you're not going to have any full team practices where they're practicing at full speed between now and Saturday. So it's really a crapshoot if that player is going to step out on the field. And I think you're better off scratching him from the rankings than putting him in, getting people's hopes up, and then he not starts. And that's why we try to eliminate as many really questionable players off the board as possible going into the weekend. Number 2, I want to draw attention to Ito Smith. I mentioned last week that he was going to have a tough matchup against UTSA. He actually hit a home run for you guys that put him in. And this week we have him ranked number 2, playing at home against a bad UTEP defense. Ito Smith was our preseason number 1 running back. He's picking up steam, and I'm looking for him to continue moving along and climbing up that charts for you. And I mean, look, he's been consistent now, and so I think he's going to have a big week for you guys. And Southern Miss leans on him at home against the Miners this week, and he's a top 5 pick. Kerryon Johnson, running back Auburn, playing at LSU. I'm telling you something, guys. I tried to throw out something for you guys every week. I know last week I missed with the Texas Tech Kansas over. I think I missed it by about 4 points. New Mexico State came in right on the number at Appalachian State, covering against the spread. I kind of like Auburn this week on the road at LSU. I don't know. Given what we've seen from Auburn, and given what we've seen from LSU so far, I just don't know how that game is under a touchdown right now. But I like the Tigers to win by a couple of scores. And I think you have to like Kerryon Johnson, what he's done for you. He's been one of the best fantasy backs right now to date when he's been healthy. And with questions around Cameron Petway right now, I think you've got to ride Kerryon Johnson out. And then number 7, Deasame St. Just, Hawaii running back, playing San Jose State. Great matchup. St. Just has been a yardage machine for you. There's no reason why things are going to slow down this week, even though Hawaii isn't playing that great. But right now with Hawaii, you've got two legit fantasy starters in John Ursua, the wide receiver, and Deasame St. Just, the running back. You've got to get them both in your lineups right now every week. Number 12, I want to draw attention to Jalen Moore, running back Appalachian State, who I mentioned and highlighted last week as the one player right now going into week 6 that people should have held on to, because I just felt good things brewing with an off week and then a game against New Mexico State. It looks like it got Jalen Moore and the Appalachian State to pull things together. Jalen Moore, 200-yard game last week, 2 touchdowns. Now back in the top 15, confidence level back up, ranked number 12, playing at Idaho this week. Number 16, David Montgomery, Iowa State, playing at home versus Kansas. I think you really have to like Montgomery this week. I know Iowa State has a lot of momentum rolling in their favor. I think they lean heavily on Montgomery this week, playing at home against a bad Jayhawks defense. Number 18, Royce Freeman, a name that we were not used to seeing past the top 10 earlier in the year. But an injury here, a bad matchup there, and all of a sudden now you have to be a little concerned with Royce Freeman after the quarterback injury as well. Like I said, bad matchup last week. Well, you know what? Not a great matchup this week. Playing on the road at Stanford. I don't know if you can put Freeman in the top 10 this week. I think you still get him in your lineup, but I'm just going to say be careful. Royce Freeman playing on the road at Stanford, I wouldn't expect a ton from him this week. Number 21, Duke Catalon, running back Houston, playing at Tulsa. Really, this is just a product of Houston playing a really bad defense. I'm going to revisit this matchup a little bit later. I know it's quite a surprise for many of you guys that have drafted Duke Catalon this year at the beginning of the year. Many of you guys who, like us, like myself, thought Duke Catalon would be a beast last year. Finally, some things coming through for him, so that's good to see for Duke Catalon and any of the fantasy owners that have him. I don't know how much of a long-term play he's going to be, but after that performance last week, I feel a little momentum in his favor, and they play a bad rushing defense this week, so I have to believe you've got to put Duke Catalon in the top 25. Justin Jackson, running back Northwestern, playing at Maryland. And I have to tell you, it's been tough sledding for Justin Jackson. I think finally his fantasy owners get rewarded this week. I think he gives you a top 25 performance, and I think you get Justin Jackson in your lineup this week, even though they've got a road game playing at Maryland. Yeah, he's been making me mad too. Justin Jackson, his comment just coming in. D'Angelo Brewer, number 25, playing at home against Houston. And look, D'Angelo Brewer was rolling in the top 12, top 10 at the beginning of the year, but man, that Tulsa's offense hitting on some hard times, just getting absolutely throttled by Tulane last week, which Dontrell Hilliard was my call last week. So I'll admit when I miss some, but I do hit some. And like I said, I did miss last week with Ronquavia Tarver. Look to make that up this week on the start bench. So stay tuned, guys. That's coming up. Number 26, Jarvian Franklin. And I tell you right now, Jarvian Franklin has potential to be a top 10 back this week, and here's why. Jamari Bogan and Levante Bellamy right now are listed as questionable. If they both do not play, I think you've really got to shoot Jarvian Franklin right up the top of this chart and put him in the top 10, top 15 running backs for week 7. So monitor that. We'll try to monitor that situation, but keep an eye on that. I think if you have Jarvian Franklin, you're feeling really good heading into week 7. Travis Homer, running back, Miami playing Georgia Tech. And like I said, I like Homer. I like Homer from here on out. But I have to tell you, this is going to be a really tough matchup this week. I'm really curious to see the distribution right now between how much Malik Rozier keeps the ball, how many handoffs they give Homer, and really, I'm curious to see how much depth they have behind him, and if any, how much that works and figures into this game. I think they have to lean on Rozier, and I think they have to lean on Homer this week. I think you're safe playing him in week 7 for sure. He's Miami's main back, guys. You've got to get him in. Number 33, Darius Geis, LSU running back playing Auburn. I have to tell you right now, what a dud. What a disappointment he's been. Is he still battling injuries? Maybe so. I don't know if there's any excuse right now, but LSU just looks so bad on offense. I don't know how they went into Florida and won that game last week. I think that speaks to how bad Florida is as opposed to how bad LSU is. I mean, you look at, I hate to play the correlation game, but they almost lose to Syracuse. They get throttled by Mississippi State, who got throttled twice themselves. Troy beats them. Troy got handed last night by South Alabama. I don't know what to make of this LSU team right now. I tell you, if there's one thing that I'm impressed with, it's been Auburn. Their only loss was to Clemson on the road, and they'd actually, if their offense today was playing back then, they might actually have had a shot to win that game. I like Auburn to hand it to LSU, even at LSU this week, and I'm telling you, you have to be a little concerned about guys heading into week 7. Jordan Ellis, number 34, Virginia playing North Carolina. I like the workload that Jordan Ellis is getting. He's a high-volume guy. I'll take high-volume guys any day of the week over low-volume, high-risk, high-reward home run hitters in the weekly lineup. Remember, my philosophy in drafts is give me the high-risk, high-reward home run hitters, guys that I could hit big or go home, that I don't want on my roster. On the weekly lineups, I'm a little opposite. I want the guy that's going to get a lot of touches, and get a lot of touches against North Carolina means a lot of success. And here's a little hint. Jordan Ellis coming up for us a little bit later in Start Bench. Jeremy Cox, number 41, Old Dominion playing at Marshall. I have to tell you, Cox fell down this list a little bit this week because Ray Laurie looks like he could make a return. And you have to really monitor that. Laurie has only been kind of moved up to questionable. He's been out for a while, and so I don't know what kind of contribution he's going to give. I actually think Cox is probably a safer play into the top 30 than down at 41, but we really need to monitor Ray Laurie's situation over the next 48 hours, and that may affect what kind of workload he gets. Number 43, Trey Sermon, Oklahoma. I just saw a question come in, so I'll knock this question out right now. I think with Trey Sermon, and the reason why I like him this week is as of right now, the last I saw, Abdul Adams was actually questionable heading into this week. So you're eliminating another piece of that running back by committee now. And I think if you're an owner of Trey Sermon, your biggest concern now is just Dimitri Flowers, who the running backs are doing all the work or most of the heavy lifting in the passing game right now. And if you had my email last week, I gave you a breakdown of that. And the Oklahoma, you know what, their offense can move the ball. Their offense can score, but they don't have a D.D. Westbrook. Their running backs have been better than their receivers in the passing game. keep an eye on that as we move forward. Number 47, Art Tompkins, running back Toledo. The reason why Tompkins is in that lineup because as of right now, the running back for Toledo is questionable, Terry Swanson. And the longer we get into the week with him being questionable, the higher Tompkins moves up on the list. I don't know if Tompkins will be a top 20, top 25 running back, but I do think if you play in an FBS league, 3 running backs, a flex, you've got to consider Tompkins if you have him, and Swanson is out this week. Number 59, take note of this player right now. Emmanuel Reed, running back Buffalo. I can tell you this right now. Guys, I have scoured everywhere I can look. If you find anything, send me an email, send me something on Twitter. If you find anything, let me know. I can't find anything on Emmanuel Reed. And I know he had a touchdown and he didn't rush for many yards last week against Western Michigan. Here's the odd part. I haven't found any injury information on Emmanuel Reed. I haven't found anything to suggest that he was held out for any reason whatsoever. But after his 1-yard touchdown, I went play-by-play in that Western Michigan Buffalo game. A 7 overtime game. After the first quarter and his touchdown run, I could not find evidence of Emmanuel Reed getting another touch the rest of that game. In the second, third, fourth quarter, or the 7 overtimes, I have found nothing on him being injured. If any of you guys find anything, forward it my way. But I think you have to be careful because that's something I noticed in the box scores, and I haven't found out any information. Why would Emmanuel Reed only have 6 carries last week, none after the first quarter, in a 7 overtime game? And I believe it was Theo Anderson who was getting all the work in the backfield. But like I said, I haven't found anything, but I'd be careful. I think there's something going on with Emmanuel Reed that we just don't know. Number 61, Tyler Nevins, running back San Jose State at Hawaii. And you're like, Joe, San Jose State hasn't been on your radar all year. What is going on? Well, I know they haven't, guys, but go look at how many yards that Hawaii defense is allowing on the ground. Look at the workload that they gave Nevins last week for San Jose State. When you marry those 2 data points, it works out and looks to be a good week for Tyler Nevins if you need a good running back sleeper in a deep FBS league this week. Number 68, Glenn Smith, running back Georgia State playing at UL Monroe. I think he could be a sneaky play this week. LaMichael Pirine, Malik Davis. Let me touch on 2 running back positions in the state of Florida. One has to go at the University of Florida, where LaMichael Pirine is vulturing the touchdowns away from Malik Davis. 4th consecutive game for Malik Davis, 90 or more yards. Could not find the end zone. As a matter of fact, those of you that had LaMichael Pirine had more fantasy points than Malik Davis. I have to tell you personally, full FBS league, I dropped Malik Davis. You need to find the end zone for me if you're going to tack on yards. So I had no problems letting him go. Just when we thought things, if we go over to Tallahassee, and we thought it looked like things were swinging in Jacques Patrick's favor, all of a sudden now Cam Akers gets a bunch of work. Well, we're headed into a Week 7 matchup playing against Duke. And Duke's defense, run defense, is respectable. So here's the deal. I actually picked up Cam Akers on the waiver wire in one of my leagues this week. But I'm not starting him this week. But maybe, just maybe, he's the guy they roll with and gets most of the work moving forward. I don't know. It's a crapshoot. It's a chance. I took it on Cam Akers. I'm doing it for the long term. But right now, I don't know if you've got Akers or Patrick in your lineup unless you are playing in a conference-specific or maybe even a Power 5 league, getting them in at the flex spot. So that runs us through the quarterback guys. That runs us through the running backs. And now I am going to touch on and go through the receivers, and not a lot highlighted here. The one thing that I'll say, at this time of the year, the wide receiver position becomes pretty apparent. It becomes pretty obvious who our elite receivers are every week. And yeah, there's some guys that come out of nowhere. But for the most part, once when we're getting into Week 7 of the season, those top 25, 30 receivers are usually the top 25, 30 receivers we see from here on out. And then you get some guys here or there based on matchups that wind up finishing in the top 25, 30 for the week. So Let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, I mean, the obvious guys are in the top 10. Andrews, Gallup, Sills, Miller, Pettis, QT, Washington, Deontay Johnson, number 8 for Toledo. We had him high last week. Didn't get in the end zone, but I actually like Johnson this week, especially now that the Rockets have lost Cody Thompson for the year with a broken leg. I think that passing game really, really favors Deontay Johnson getting a lot of looks. Jaleel Scott, number 11, playing New Mexico State at Georgia Southern. I have to tell you, had Jaleel Scott not even gotten hurt last week, he probably would be inside the top 10 with ease. But this week, he's number 11. We've got news that he's probable this week, and I think you're good to go. And if Larry Rose is out, I even think that makes Scott a lot more valuable. Penny Hart, number 12, Georgia State. Now, Penny Hart is a name going back 2-3 years. Let me tell you, I feel really good about Penny Hart. I'm glad that a lot of you guys picked him up and are starting him. It's glad to see Penny Hart doing well. He was projected to do well going into our 2016 season. Injury. Going into this season, we didn't know what to think. And you know what? He's rebounded. He's given us some really good performances. He's got a really sweet matchup this week playing against a UL Monroe defense that's given up a ton of points. I think you have to feel comfortable and confident in a Week 7 start with Penny Hart going at UL Monroe. Deontay Burnett, and I did see Deontay Burnett questions coming in. I have him highlighted. USC playing home against Utah this week. Deontay Burnett, last I've heard, pretty confident that he's going to play. It looks like he's probable, and that comes like, with the news that Stephen Carr looks like he's definitely out. So it looks like that you don't have a concern with Deontay Burnett this week. Now, how healthy is he? That I cannot answer for you. But if he's in the lineup, I believe he's going to give you something. And I also have Tyler Vaughns highlighted at number 38. He's actually creeping up that chart, guys. And if Deontay Burnett is a little banged up, he's still going to play. But I do like Vaughns as well. And yes, his production has slipped. Someone just commented. And I think it has to do with that nagging injuries here or there. And even bad matchups. Don't forget about that. Also, Darren Carrington, number 14. A lot of questions last week about Carrington coming in with the injury to Tyler Huntley. And this is what I told you guys. You still have to feel comfortable with Carrington because Troy Williams was the quarterback. And it's not that Troy Williams you had to feel comfortable with. It's that Utah was coming off of a bye. They had 2 weeks for Williams and Carrington to get on the same page. That bye week, if nothing else, helped their chemistry. And I think Carrington is okay as a Week 7 start playing on the road at USC, even though Troy Williams will be starting at quarterback for the Utes this weekend. Number 17, A.J. Brown, wide receiver, Ole Miss. Here's my gut call of the week, guys. Vanderbilt was playing some really good defense at the beginning of the year. Vanderbilt played a couple of good opponents, right? I think they played Alabama, Georgia, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were handled pretty easily. Right now, that Vanderbilt defense needs to get it together. I personally think that this is a bad time for Vanderbilt to go into Ole Miss and play an Ole Miss team that got handled a couple of times as well. I think Ole Miss's offense rebounds at home before Vanderbilt is able to get the defense back on the tracks. I like the Rebels at home big this week, and I think A.J. Brown could contribute in a way in which he was contributed in the first couple of weeks of the season before he got hurt. I do like A.J. Brown in the top 20. Braxton Berrios, the wide receiver, Miami. They're playing Georgia Tech this week. Look, guys, Miami is not going to run the ball up and down against Georgia Tech. They're going to have to do some damage in the passing game. And right now, with Amon Richards kind of being hobbled throughout the year, Berrios has been Rozier's go-to guy. I think you have to like him as a wide receiver 2, 3, or flex option this week in Week 7 playing at home against Georgia Tech. Number 31, Corey Willis, Central Michigan, makes his return this week. Playing against Toledo, they're going to need some points in that game. The great thing for Central Michigan offense, Corey Willis and now tight end Tyler Conklin have both returned, which will do wonders for that offense as they have to keep up with the Toledo offense, who is without Cody Thompson. And I do have number 39, Jon'Vea Johnson, wide receiver Toledo. who averaged, I think it was like 19 yards a catch last year opposite Cody Thompson, right? But now they're going to need him opposite Deontay Johnson. I think Jon'Vea Johnson is the wide receiver you pick up and plug in this week. I have to tell you, personally, in one of my leagues, I scooped up Johnson. I don't have Deontay Johnson, but I did scoop up Jon'Vea Johnson, and I did scoop up Denzel McKinley-Lewis, receiver from Toledo. They are going to need a number two option. One of those two guys is going to emerge the better of the two. I'm going to watch and wait, play this out for a couple of weeks, and come playoff time, I'm going to have somebody at that number 2 Toledo receiver position. I feel good about that call. Number 70, Pooh Strickland, wide receiver Baylor at Oklahoma State. I think this is the receiver on this week's rankings in the receiver mark that could outperform his ranking. We have him at number 70. Baylor's going to have to keep up with Oklahoma State. I actually like, I'll tell you right now, that should be adjusted. I don't like Pooh Strickland as low as 70. I actually like Pooh Strickland better than some of the guys we have listed in the top 50. I would have him in there as a flex option this week. And then number 87, Jeff Badett. I have to tell you as well, another player that I think could have a better week this week than where we have him ranked. But there's two things playing into this ranking with Jeff Badett. One, CeeDee Lamb is questionable to play. If CeeDee Lamb is out, you're eliminating one factor against Badett. And then all of a sudden now you have to remember the Sooners are hitting those running backs out of the backfield. They're utilizing Andrews, the tight end. The receivers only caught, I think, 8 passes last week as a group collectively. That scares me from really being overly confident in an Oklahoma receiver. But I actually think that game is going to be really close this week in a game against Texas. I think they're going to need Badett, and I think he could be good for one big play in that game if you need a boom or bust play this week at the wide receiver position. A couple of guys that I'll touch on in the rankings real quick, and I'll go back, and that's going to really do it for the rankings, but a lot of guys questionable this week. We didn't rank the Northern Illinois quarterbacks, guys. We don't know if it's going to be Santa Catarina or if it's going to be Childers coming into the show. Monitor that situation, but it could be Childers that gets the nod there. Terry Swanson, Darnell Woolfolk, Army, Cameron Petway, Auburn, Epstein, Illinois, Ray Laurie, Old Dominion, Terry Swanson, Toledo, Jamari Bogan, Western Michigan. All guys we have listed questionable this week. Didn't even feel it was worth ranking them because we're too scared to put them in the lineup this week. And at the receiver position, 3 guys that I listed that I wanted to make note of. Richie James still out, and I'm really concerned long-term for Richie James because once when a player starts missing more than a month of action, you really got to be concerned about their conditioning and whatnot, being able to stick when they get back. Kanawe Noah, the wide receiver for Cal, when Demetrius Robertson was ruled out for the year. His game, he actually started working into the passing game more. I'm really disappointed that it looks like he may not play or is listed as questionable. I don't think you could put him in at this point. It's too risky of a play. And like I mentioned, CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver at Oklahoma, is questionable to play this week, and I think you've really got to be concerned sticking him in your lineup. So that'll do it for the player rankings, guys. Hang in there. I'm going to get to your questions. We're going to run through start bench this week, week 7. A lot to make up for my embarrassing Ronquavian Tarver start last week. I really wanted to delete that video, but guys, look, that's the way it is over here at the CFF site. We hit some, we miss some, and when we miss them, we don't run from them. We just want another week to redeem ourselves, and that's what we'll do. So let's get into it, guys. Here we go. The first bench of week 7 is a guy that I suggested benching about 3 weeks ago. And it's Eric Dungey, quarterback Syracuse, playing at home. That's right, playing at home against Clemson. Now, 3 weeks ago, I mentioned we had a bench of Dungey when Syracuse played on the road at LSU. But we failed to take LSU's defense at face value after they lost to Mississippi State 37-7. After LSU's home loss to Troy in week 5, it's no surprise, looking back, that Dungey went in there and almost led Syracuse to an upset of LSU. Now that we're halfway through the 2017 season, surprises are far and few between. Now, don't tell that to Oklahoma, right? But this week, Syracuse has a challenge of facing one of the nation's top defenses at home. Clemson is only allowing 165 yards per game in the air, and they're ranked 5th in the nation in points allowed. They're only giving up 11.3 points per game. Too scary for me. I'm staying away from Eric Dungey week 7 at home against Clemson. Mike Boone, running back, Cincinnati, playing at South Florida this week. And you know, Boone has not quite recovered after suffering an ankle injury in week 2 at Michigan. After missing 2 games, Boone returned and has only totaled 40 yards rushing on 13 carries in the past 2 games. Don't expect things to get any easier when the Bearcats travel to South Florida and face a Bears defense ranked 2nd in the country against the run. They're only allowing they're allowing less than 75 yards per game on the ground. Mike Boone, running back, Cincinnati, week 7 bench at South Florida. Demario Richard, running back, Arizona State, playing at home against Washington. Now, even though Richard has not topped the 80-yard mark in any game this year, the senior running back has logged at least 15 carries. He's rushed for at least 50 yards and scored at least 1 touchdown in each of the Sun Devils' last 3 games. That streak could come to an end this weekend when Arizona State plays host to Washington. The Huskies boast the nation's 3rd best rush defense. They're allowing 78.5 rushing yards per game and have only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns through 6 games this year. Demario Richard, running back, Arizona State, a week 7 bench at home against Washington. And then Oshimar Abercrombie, the running back, Coastal Carolina, playing on the road at Western Kentucky. And after Abercrombie rushed for 224 yards in the first 2 games of the season, he's been limited to 111 yards on the ground and no touchdowns in the past 3 games. In the last 3 games, he's only run for 111 yards and no touchdowns. If he's going to buck the trend, this is the week to do it, though, guys. I think this could be the week that he gets off the schneid, but I just don't know for sure. They're facing an Arkansas State defense that's allowing over 230 yards per game on the ground. But you know what? My confidence level is shot. Quarterback Tyler Keene has thrown 7 touchdown passes in the past 2 games. Is it a change in offensive philosophy for the Chanticleers? Maybe. I don't know. Too risky for me. After a hot start to 2017, Coastal Carolina Oshimar Abercrombie, running back, is a week 7 bench. Now, let's get into the start, guys, and here we go. Rev up the engines. Time to redeem ourselves from last week. And like I mentioned, I don't like to throw obvious names into the pool, so I'm going to pick some names here that some of you guys, especially in full FBS modes, this list is probably catered a little bit more to you this week. So here we go. Let's get it started. And the first one that I'm going to jump on, I mentioned it. I was excited about him at the top. Arian Worthman, quarterback, Air Force, playing at home against UNLV. You know, Air Force is in the middle of a 4-game losing streak, but it's not from a lack of production from the quarterback position. Worthman has been a workhorse. He's logged at least 20 carries in each of Air Force's last 4 games, and he's accounted for 8 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. Expect him to be a huge fantasy factor this weekend when Air Force hosts UNLV. The Rebels are allowing over 214 yards per game on the ground and 5 yards per rushing attempt. I think that's a formula to get Worthman in your lineup in week 7. Justin Stockton, running back, Texas Tech, playing at West Virginia. And I know, here we go. We're getting away from the Texas Tech passing game, and now we're getting to the Texas Tech running game. What are we getting to? Here's what we got. Justin Stockton. In the past 4 games, Stockton has totaled 80 yards or more of offense in each game. He has rushed for at least 100 yards twice and has scored 3 touchdowns. The senior back should continue his positive trend when Texas Tech travels to West Virginia and faces the 2nd worst defense in the Big 12 against the run. West Virginia is allowing 214 yards per game on the ground, and I think Stockton continues his role and is worth a week 7 start on the road at West Virginia this week. Jordan Ellis, running back, Virginia. I mentioned when we were doing the running back rankings, we were going to come back to Jordan Ellis playing at North Carolina. Here's what I have on Jordan Ellis, guys. He has carried the ball at least 20 times in 4 of 5 games this year, but he has failed to top the 100-yard mark in any week. He may be, and I don't know for sure, he may be the only player in the country to have 20 or more carries in 4 different games and never even reach the 100-yard mark. But that's Jordan Ellis. However, he has rushed for at least 80 yards in each one of those games and has scored 6 touchdowns this year. This week, I'm projecting Ellis to top the century mark for the first time this year, facing the ACC's worst run defense. North Carolina is allowing 241 yards per game on the ground, which ranks them in the bottom 10 of all of college football. Get Jordan Ellis in your lineup, week 3 start on the road at North Carolina. Penny Hart, here's a receiver that I mentioned when we were doing the rankings that I felt good for Penny Hart. Hart has caught at least 7 passes in 3 consecutive games. He's topped 130 yards receiving and scored a touchdown in the Panthers' last 2 games. And on Saturday, Georgia State travels to UM Monroe, plays a Warhawks defense that's allowing 37 points per game and over 235 yards per game in the air. I love the formula. I love the momentum. Penny Hart, a week 7 start on the road at UL Monroe. And here we go. 4 of the 5 starts have been road guys. And we have another road guy, week 7, to wrap it up. Here's my home run hit for this week. And let's see if I can redeem myself for Ronquavian Tarver. You know, in a 35-22 win over SMU last week, over SMU last week, Houston running back Duke Catalon topped the 100-yard mark for the first time in his collegiate career. That performance was what many fantasy owners were expecting from Catalon in 2016 and now headed into 2017. It didn't happen, but now it has. And I always say this. You'll always hear me say it, and you'll see it in my emails. Guys, you have to temper your enthusiasm when a player is coming off of a career game. But how can you bottle your excitement about Catalon this week when they're facing the nation's worst defense against the run? And I laughed last week when I was giving you the stats on Tulsa and told you to get Dontrell Hilliard in your lineup. I'm even going to laugh more this week when you hear these numbers. Tulsa is allowing 347 yards per game on the ground. 347 yards per game on the ground. Guys, the next closest team in the nation is UCLA. They're allowing 284 yards per game on the ground. That's 62 yards worse than the second worst team in the FBS. Duke Catalon, running back Houston, coming off of a career game, could have another career game, week 7, on the road at Tulsa. Get him in your lineup. I think it's worth the play. And that does it, guys, for this week's Start Bench, this week's player rankings. And I'm going to go ahead and check in and try to get some of your questions here, guys. Try to address some of these. Here we go. Start at the top. Travis Homer or Benson, Georgia Tech defense, not bad. You know, I think it's a coin flip with both of those guys. If I had to pick one right now, I'm just going to go with Homer just because I do think that Traquan Marshall could vulture the touchdowns for Georgia Tech. I'm giving a slight edge to Travis Homer this week over Cavante Benson. Yes, LSU is terrible. I do see that comment as well. Trey Sermon, I did address Trey Sermon. I did address Deontay Burnett. Let's see. No Junji. What about Mike White or Coastal Carolina quarterback in a big FBS league? I'll tell you right now, the way that that's shaking out right now, I would rather Tyler Keene. And think about how big of a difference a year has made. I would rather Tyler Keene right now than I would Mike White. I don't know what that tells us at this point. But I don't think if you go back and check the fantasy points this year, I don't think Mike White has had a 20-point fantasy game. If he did, it was probably in their very first game of the year. So that's it, guys, on there online. I'm going to go ahead and check real quick on Twitter, see if there's any more emails that I'll go ahead and address right here on the show, and then get it to, here we go. Joe, this comes in from Steve Northcutt. I have Quentin Flowers going this week, but it looks like all three of my other quarterbacks are likely not starting this week for one reason or another. I have Buechele, Texas, Ragland, Miami, Ohio on Saturday, and Davis, Louisiana, Lafayette tonight. Which of these guys do you think has the best chance of contributing at all this week? It's definitely not Ragland, and I'm having doubts about Buechele. My most confidence would be in Davis, and I don't know, maybe the game has started already. I don't even know if he's playing, so I probably got that a little too late, guys. This comes in, Ronnie Rivers and Keyshawn Johnson from Fresno State, and Cam Akers, Florida State, and Zach Moss, Utah. I need one for the flex spot. I tell you right now, man, that's a tough one right there. I may take a shot with Cam Akers upside over those players right now when I look at the matchups. If anything, maybe I don't like Rivers. Keyshawn Johnson, if it's PPR, Keyshawn Johnson. If non-PPR, I'm taking a shot with Cam Akers this week. And I'll do, and that's it, guys. That's up here. I'll see if we have any more coming in for you guys on the show. And that's it. So look, guys, thanks again. Thanks for joining in. We're right at about 50 minutes. I know there's a game on tap. I think it's Texas State, UL Lafayette. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the games. Thanks again for another great week. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Give me some type of feedback, thumbs up, like the show. Pass it along, guys. I'd really love some feedback to see how you all are really taking in this show. So that's it, guys. Good luck this weekend. Once again, I'm Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the college fantasy football site. That's a wrap for Week 7. Good luck. I'll talk to you guys again in Week 8.